Let's have a look at windows in the 3D Tiny House Designer. To get started, I'm going to select the window menu here in my exterior library panel, and you will see two options, Windows and Skylights. To get started, I'm just going to choose Windows, and you will see a bunch of standard windows, but then you also have angled windows. I'm just going to cover the standard windows for now, and I'm going to record a separate tutorial for the angled windows as well to go into more detail here. So I'm going to just pick a bifold window here to get started, and I'm going to put it onto the exterior wall here like that. For tips and tricks on how to place windows or doors, which work very similarly, I would recommend watching the door tutorial or the exterior door tutorial, which teaches you the best practices for placing exterior doors and windows. So let's have a look at the specific settings that only apply to windows that I haven't covered yet in the door video. So one thing that you will see here is the orientation. The orientation allows you to switch in which way the panels are separated. So for windows, sometimes you have a window that stacks this way. So for example, if you have a window that is actually the same height as a door here, for example, let's make this 2000 like this, and I'm just going to place it over here. I'm just going to delete this door and make this into a window. There we go. Let's say we'll make this 900 wide only, but we want to put in, let's say, 10 panels like that, or we want to put in maybe 5 panels. That's probably more realistic. Now all of a sudden you have more of a louver style window as well, and then of course you can put in the different panel sizes for each of these panels to make sure that you have the design that you want as well. So that's the difference between a door and a window. It actually allows you to also change the orientation of your panels as well. So the next thing that we want to look at as well are the skylights, which work quite similarly to windows, only that you place them on a roof. So I'm just going to go back into my windows and I'm going to select my skylights. There we go. So let's grab a skylight and let's place it, where do we want to place it? Let's place it somewhere over here. So I'll just press enter on my keyboard here for now, and you will see those dimension lines pop up here again as well. One thing that we'll see here is that we only have around 240 mils on every side. We might want to make this skylight a little bit smaller because we will want to make sure that the framing can actually go around this easily and support the skylight. And now once we have changed the size of the skylight, we can go in and just change the distance to the corner of the window, of the exterior wall, or the roof in this case. And let's say we'll make this 2000 here like this, and now we have placed my skylight. So one thing to keep in mind, skylights are easiest to be placed with the dimension move tool. So rather than moving it around with a gizmo, I would recommend moving it around with the dimension move tool, because that way you can always make sure that your skylight is placed accurately. A tip for placing windows, always make sure that you align the height of the windows. So let's say we'll just quickly get rid of all of these windows like this here, there we go. And we'll place a bunch of different windows. So this is more of a style question as well, but if you have a bunch of different windows on different heights, it might look more appealing if you make sure that all of the tops of the windows line up. So let's say we'll move this down here to, let's say, 1000 mils. This one here comes up to 1000 mils, and then this one comes down to 1000 mils. So all of a sudden you now have a design that looks a little bit more streamlined. And another thing is the framing will also be a little bit easier to build because you don't have dimensions that are all over the place for every single window. One other thing that is important when you're designing a tiny house with a Fender trailer, and I've covered how Fender trailers work in the trailer video. One important thing to consider when you're placing windows, you don't want to place a window over the part where the fender ends. So if you think about the framing that is running behind this, you will have a stud that runs up here, and then another stud next to it that runs up in here, which will be structural to be able to support the wall better. So make sure to place it within the fender if you want to place a window, and don't place it over the edges of the fender, because otherwise things might get a little bit complicated. Another tip when you are designing your tiny house, don't place too many windows. A misconception is that when you are designing a tiny house, it's super important to have windows everywhere, but you don't need that many windows to have a lot of natural light, because in the end it is a small space and you don't need to have, let's say, 70% of the exterior facade covered with windows to be able to let all of the natural light in. Sometimes less is more as well, and it will also keep your design cheaper, because windows are quite expensive, and at the same time windows are also heavy, so the more windows you place, the heavier the design will get. One other thing that is important when you're placing doors and windows: natural ventilation is easier to achieve when you have windows that are on the opposite sides of the tiny house. So in this case, if I can open up this part of the tiny house and this part here as well, you will have a cross draft coming through. And of course, if you have windows on every side of the tiny house, you can make sure that there's a draft coming through everywhere. Another thing is heat rises up. So if you can place a window up high or a skylight up high, that means you can now have a draft coming through rather than just sideways. It can also come up here and get rid of all of the hot air that accumulates in the roof.